Theolets, what's up? I'm Lazar Roykuch, and today we are analyzing Chapter 1 of Jane Eyre. Let's get started. Bam! Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Okay, this is one of the older books out there. A lot of people have heard of Jane Eyre before. Right now, I am going to analyze the first chapter based on the notes that I have created in order to help broaden the knowledge base on this book. Now, I don't like looking up chapter reviews on the internet because honestly, it doesn't feel like it's coming from me, and then I'm just supplementing that stuff with more of my knowledge. So I might be repeating some things that you already know, but I think that I'm going to offer an original perspective that no one else has offered before. That's what I'm going to try to do within these videos, because these are the Theolets. So Theoretical Literaturist is a channel that I created in order to explore the theory in literature. So look at things that might not actually be what the author intended, but if they did intend this, then what could that mean? So we are exploring many possibilities, and we are comparing many things from pros and cons to this. Does this really matter? We're looking at the moral perspectives, and that's what I really want to do. I'm going to do a lot of predictions. The predictions might not be right, so people who read Jane Eyre are like, what are you saying? This is random. Well, I'm doing it based on what I've just read from the chapter. So I'm going to begin with chapter 1 of Jane Eyre. Hold on. So, let's begin with the characters, right? The characters that we're introduced to. Okay, I'm going to have my book out and my notebook out. So, just don't be confused if I'm not looking at you all the time. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. I'm not some sort of amateur in the field. You might be like, why would you trust me? Because I'm only an 8th grader, actually. Yes, I'm actually 14 already, but I'm turning 15 in 11 months. Yes. And I guess I didn't have to say that. I should have just said I turned 14 a month ago, but that just sounds better to say, talk about the future. But I am decent at language arts. I love the subject, and I'm really excited to talk to you about Jane Eyre. I really am. Now, a lot of people are like, why would you start writing about your book? Well, for me it is that I want my work in this life to be meaningful. I don't want to just read something for the purpose of reading it. I don't think you want that either. You want your entertainment to have some meaning. Now, you're like, okay, I want it to relax my mind, but is that really what entertainment's for? The writer didn't write to relax your mind. He wrote it, or she, in this case it's going to be a she, so I'm going to call it a she. She wrote it to make you think about the current status during that time. So whether it be the unfair treatment of orphans, or whether it be, how some people are valued more than others just because they are related to the person. So basically, the other people like Eliza and Georgina and John Reed, they might do some bad things, but they're children of Mrs. Reed, so of course she's going to value them more than maybe Jane Eyre, for example, who is an orphan and not related to her. So that's kind of how we treat strangers, I think, a little bit more harshly than we do treat our own family, and why we should treat everyone with equal respect. That's a huge part of this book, but before I get into all that, why don't we start analyzing, shall we? So, what is really I like about this book here, Jane Eyre, is that they have footnotes, so you can see what a word means if you don't know what that word means. So it really helped me. I, of course, have a lot of questions for Jane Eyre. Sadly, Charlotte Bronte's not alive. All the people that I'm going to be reviewing are not alive. I just want you to keep that in mind. No one is alive. I don't like dead people. It's just that dead people are the best writers. And that's because most books are not seen, their value is not seen until after the author dies, and then they see the impact that that book has had on society, which is why I like reading from dead authors. Okay, so here we go. Jane Eyre is the protagonist of this story. A protagonist is the main character, so someone we cheer for. We want Jane Eyre to have a good life because she's someone that we value as a human being. She's probably the most interesting human being of this story, besides Mr. Reed, who is dead. The antagonists of Jane Eyre are the people who dislike her. So we have the sisters and the brothers, which are basically the sons and the daughters of Mr. Reed and Mrs. Reed. And they're called Georgina Reed. What's the other names? I think that's Eliza Reed and John Reed. So John is also called Jack, but that's just something that you should know. And we have this huge antagonistic, relationship between them, which creates a really good story because you're like, let's go Jane Eyre, let's go Jane Eyre. So you're cheering her on against this other person. So just when she seems like she's about to lose, it seems that she's getting a little bit better and then not much better. So when there is this kind of juxtaposition between the characters, it creates tension, and tension means good conversations. There is not one good book where people don't dislike other people. Because maybe there is, but they then dislike society, and society is a formation of people. So you either dislike one person or you dislike a group of people. You can't just dislike no one. Oh, I'm a kind person. Or else you're not the protagonist of the story, right? It's just stupid. I'm not going to read a book of people just saying, oh, I'm walking on the sand, I'm walking on the sand. No, there's a clear protagonist and a clear antagonist. Sometimes they don't have a lot of conflict, but they still are there to make the story happen, right? Because of the tension, the protagonist feels this way. Without the tension, protagonist would never have discovered such ideas. We need the antagonist for the protagonist to learn, okay? So, at the beginning of Jane Eyre, and I'm going to read the very first page to you, because this is a really important page. It's this one. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. We had been wandering, indeed, in the leafless shrubbery an hour in the morning, but since dinner, Mrs. Reed, when there was no company, dined early. This is parentheses, of course. The cold winter wind had brought with it clouds so somber and a rain so penetrating that further outdoor exercise was now out of the question. So, there is no possibility of taking a walk that day. That kind of sets a dreary atmosphere for this book to take place. Now, the whole point of setting a dreary atmosphere is to foreshadow sad things that may occur. When Charlotte Bronte writes that, how there was no possibility, it kind of makes you think, okay, why is such a tragic setting being given to me? That's the main thing that we first think of. And another thing that we think of is the leafless shrubbery. It sounds kind of like an oxymoron because shrubbery is considered a plant, right? Like shrubbery is like all is supposed to be full of leaves, but no, it's leafless. So it's basically the winter, right, when the leaves fall out. But that's not really shrubbery anymore, is it? So that's kind of oxymoronic, in my opinion. But when there's no outdoor exercise, the outdoors is considered an adventurous thing. It's in many books considered an adventurous thing, and the indoors is more isolated, right? You're isolated from the real world, and no one can save you indoors. And for Jane Eyre, she probably really likes the outdoors, as seen when she reads a book known as Bewick's History of British Birds, which is all about the outdoors. And these pictures, they enthrall her. They make her very interested about life. And she becomes a little child. And she is a little child, but I don't think we accept her as a little child because of her complex feelings. She has undergone so much in her life, and she is 10 years old. That is absolutely fascinating to the reader, because she seems like she's almost at her midlife crisis right now because of all the things that she has to go through as an orphan during this time. And this is, of course, Charlotte Bronte's way of making us like the protagonist. We really, really do like a protagonist who is struggling through this, because we don't want her to struggle through this. We want there to be a nice ending, and that's what she does. Now, Jane Eyre is known as a questioner, according to Bessie. And you're like, who is Bessie? Well, I'm going to tell you right now. Bessie is the nurse. That's what she's called in the second paragraph. But the thing is, Bessie is considered perhaps the first detriment to Jane Eyre's character. Because Bessie criticizes her for what she does, and she only criticizes her for what she does really because of all the other things that are occurring. Because of Eliza, John, and Georgina's their treatment towards them, and then Bessie, of course, says, well, I have to agree with them, I don't want to lose my job, or that's at least what I think. But yeah, you see how everyone's against her. Everyone is against Jane Eyre. And I have no idea what is going around in the background. I just hear yelling from everywhere, so maybe that's going to increase the tension. But back to this. I'm going to look here. Okay. So, here's another good part. It says that Bessie says that she wants Jane Eyre to acquire a more sociable and childlike disposition, a more attractive and sprightly manner, something lighter, franker, more natural, as it were, and that she must exclude her from privileges intended only for contented, happy little people. Now, this is an excuse. This is all an excuse. So Jane Eyre is asking, why am I treated this way? Well, it's because of your behavior. And I don't think it's because of her behavior, because Jane Eyre's behavior is quite good. It's quite normal, it's quite human being-like. And the thing is, she has to say this, I feel like, Bessie, because she has to make an excuse for why does John treat her this way. Well, it's because of her behavior, and if she could change, it'd be a lot better. And there are some truths to that, but I feel like Jane Eyre, no matter what, she has everything against her, because already orphans carry a negative connotation during this time. So, it makes sense for people to treat her this way. But at the same time, you're right. It hurts you. It hurts your heart because we're treating human beings. These are human beings. They're not animals, right? They're not wild-like beasts. They're human beings just like us. And you're asking yourself, why would you treat someone like you that way? Right? The golden rule. I know it's cliche, but it's really a big part of this story. And it really does sadden me. That whole idea of how everyone's against her. Everyone's against Jane Eyre. Now, why do they want her to acquire a sprightly manner? Because if you're really happy, what happens is that you don't question things. So I'm going to make a little bit of connecting to another piece of literature. In specific, I'm going to connect to the piece of literature known as Fahrenheit 451. So there, the government wants everyone to be happy, right? Because if they're not happy, then they're questioning things, and then they're asking, why are the firemen burning books? So here, again, they want Jane Eyre to be happy, because if she starts questioning things, then she will wonder, try to be confused, why am I getting treated this way? And so it's like, be happy, and almost all of it will go away. Otherwise, well, you will uncover too much for your own good. This is the idea of everyone wants you to be ignorant. Society wants you to stay ignorant. Yeah, but Jane Eyre does not want to be. And Bessie actually says she spurns that. She scorns Jane Eyre for doing that. And how she scorns it, she's like, I don't like questioners. Plain and simple, I don't like questioners. And she doesn't want that. She wants her to be more sociable. And this is a problem with our definition of social. We define social as just conversing with one another, but when we start to go too curious, it's like, oh, you're not sociable anymore. You can't do that. And that's really weird for me, how there's the limits of sociable, because sociable shouldn't be limited in that way. I think when you say that you're sociable, it means that you can talk however you want, but society says, no, if you are sociable, you have to be just talking to make the other person happy. The problems with conversations that are not deep is that they don't mean anything. They are absolutely useless, and they're the conversations we have almost every single day with our friends, with our family, with our pets. If you talk to your pets, maybe the only interesting conversations you do are when you talk to your dead relative. You're like, "Dear mother, I'm so sad that this has happened. I really love you. Please be good in heaven," or whatever. But that's more profound. So we don't have a lot of those profound conversations. We have a lot of unprofound conversations. And the problem with unprofound conversations is that they do not do anything. Is that they do not satisfy curiosity. Now, when you have distractions, this curiosity goes away. And this is what I'm trying to say. When you're like, "Oh, I'm rich. Oh, I'm rich. Oh, I'm rich." And that's basically literally all the three kids, John Reed, Georgina Reed, and Eliza Reed. They're spoiled little brats. That's what they are. And then they just get so infatuated with the idea of richness that they don't ask any of these questions, and they're all happy and contented. But then they're asking, why is Jane Eyre not contented? And that's such a stupid question to ask. Because Jane Eyre suffers John Reed's violent tyrannies. How do they call it in the book? Because John Reed is basically the definition of someone who needs to go to an anger management class. I'm going to be right here and blunt with that. John Reed is a really horrible human being. He is the main antagonist of the story, and the other people are just like subsidiary antagonists that build to John Reed's power. John Reed is really a horrible human being. He kind of reminds me of Hindley from Wuthering Heights. Hindley's also a pretty bad human being, but John Reed is much, much, much worse. And of course, they treat the person with disrespect. So John Reed treats Jane Eyre with disrespect, just like Hindley treated Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights with disrespect. We all want people from our own family, and we just don't want to give anything to people who have a lower social status. So it completely bewilders us when we have to be in that situation. And the thing is, Mr. Reed is dead. Mr. Reed, I think, took Jane Eyre in, and he's dead. And so now the antagonizing spirits are much more. They're much higher. And I do think that that's part of the story. Charlotte Bronte wanted to create that atmosphere where she's disliked, hated, loathed because of all these different components of her nature. Because this is what causes her to feel in certain ways and to draw parallels. And that is a great historical allusions that are paved in. I said that really badly. I meant to say that historical allusions that we didn't see before are added in with Charlotte Bronte, and we get to see more of the lives of an orphan. Okay, so she reads books. And of course, as you know, people who read books are intellectuals. And we don't like intellectuals because they think too much and they question too much. So this is one reason that she's ostracized from society. And that's a very cliche thing. Bibliophiles do not get to live the lives of other people simply because they want to learn more. And you're like, well, we can't let everyone learn more, can we? No, we have to have everyone being dumb. Because if everyone's dumb, we can control their conversations. Everything's very simple. Society likes dumb people because, well, they're easy to manipulate. They are normal and you don't have to at all, you're not scared about anything. But when they're smart, they don't like them. Because they can say some things that can cause commotion. So she reads Bewick's History of British Birds. And when she's reading it, she says this: I returned to my book, Bewick's History of British Birds. The letterpress thereof I cared little for, generally speaking, yet there were certain introductory pages that, child as I was, I could not pass quite as a blank. What she's saying here, Jane Eyre, is she's saying that this is a pretty boring book. I don't take any interest in Bewick's History of British Birds. Like, who gives a damn about birds? Because I don't, and neither do I, and no one cares about it. But the thing is, even in such a boring book, you can find such intriguing things. And this is the life of a book. A book has a lot of life to it, and it just means that you can find something in any book. And here we have this part, the introductory pages, and what these introductory pages, why she associates with these, is because the birds are a symbol for her. She understands what they go through because they also live sad lives and morose lives, and that's a huge part for her. So if she was not an orphan, perhaps she wouldn't sympathize with these parts, but since she is an orphan, then she does sympathize. So I'm going to read this little passage. But before I do, I want to say why this is all included. Like, why does Charlotte Bronte write about Bewick's History of British Birds? No one cares about British birds. Well, specifically because she's actually autobiographing her own lives with the Bronte sisters. The Bronte sisters actually read Bewick's History of British Birds, as noted in the footnotes, and then later there's another story called Pamela, and there's another story called Henry, Earl of Moorland, and both these stories were read by the Bronte sisters. The Bronte sisters really enjoyed these stories, if I am not mistaken. But, so why did they include that? Because they wanted to give an idea of how they felt, probably. She's putting herself into Jane Eyre's shoes and saying what she did as a child, because she wants to tell us how she was. And she's kind of autobiographing her own life. The author is inserting herself in some of the characters. Of course, she was probably not living in poverty. The Bronte sisters, they were not treated as badly, but perhaps she felt somewhat like her in the way that she wanted to start a revolution and be an independent woman. The Bronte sisters were very independent, and they were kind of the true womanly authors. I don't know what to say else besides that, because I'm just saying the words that come to my mind. But she was one of the first of her kind. We have Jane Austen, then we have the Bronte sisters, and later we do get more of a feminist approach. But here, feminism was very relatively early, so just to write such a book like this is just wonderful and amazing. But it's not necessarily feminist, because I don't think feminism was definitely not allowed during this time period. This is not until probably Agnes Pontellier's, which is a character in Kate Chopin's The Awakening, that we saw feminism really take shape into books. Of course, Kate Chopin didn't see that as feminism, but that really was the beginning of feminism. We're going to read, actually, the first chapter 1, and I'm going to just look at the footnotes right here, and it says how, yes, the Bronte sisters were familiar with Bewick's work, yes, and that's what they were talking about. So actually, the Pamela and Henry, Earl of Moorland, they were not familiar with those, but that's still a pretty important part. It's just more literary allusions. But the Bewick's History of British Birds is what the Bronte sisters were completely interested in, because they were amazed by the artistic skill that he honed in, and so she's kind of writing like Jane Eyre, because Jane Eyre is considered a very artistic person, because what I mean by that is that she really likes expressing herself, and that's kind of in line with that artistic work area. I can't say much more than that, but that's basically the autobiography for Charlotte Bronte. She wants to kind of give her own life so that she can build these characters, because remember, authors connect with their characters. If they have no connection, then they're not their characters. They're just someone else's characters. And so we needed this part. This was a very important part. Now, when it says here, I was going to read this part, in Bewick's History of British Birds, it says, where the northern ocean in vast whirls boils round the naked melancholy isles of farthest Thule, and the Atlantic surge pours in among the stormy Hebrides. This section is pretty easy to ignore, because you're just like, oh, they're talking about nature. Oh, connecting with nature. Oh, it's a self versus nature conflict. Self versus nature is a huge thing that pops up in literature, where the character feels a strong presence in nature, because nature is a constant, nature never changes, And so they have a presence in nature because nature actually listens to them. No one else listens to them. Nature will always be there to listen, and nature is the only thing that's real, perhaps. Everything else is artificial things made by mankind, so the only thing you can really trust is nature. But that's very cliche. This is much more of Jane Eyre's own feeling. When it talks about pours in among the stormy Hebrides, the stormy Hebrides kind of reminds me of Jane Eyre, because Jane Eyre is having these conflicts, and her brain is in a huge tumultuous spin. It's just in a complete tumult, and that tumultuous action is what she's describing here. These waves are basically her thoughts just pouring into her mind, and everything that the society has done to her, it's all within here. And that's what she says. She says that I formed an idea of my own, shadowy like all the half-comprehended notions that float dim through children's brains, but strangely impressive. See, she actually does connect with this, because what she means is that all these realms, this is in a different part, I believe, but this is kind of talking about the forlorn regions in where this all occurs, okay? So in Lapland, Siberia, Spitsbergen, very forlorn, very depressing areas to live in, right? And so she talks kind of about how her own life feels like that. And we see how her forlorn depression kind of plays out in chapter 2. But this is all adding to her own morose character. She feels like she's at the very bottom of the power struggle, and she can't get her way up. And the thing is, she doesn't understand why. That's what it means. Shadowy, like all the half-comprehended notions. She still thinks it's all a mirage. It's all an illusion. Because remember, she's 10 years old. She doesn't really understand what the meaning of power struggle is, why people treat her that way. She just knows that she was taken in and that they treat her that way. And she's like, this is unjust and unfair. And it reminds me of temper tantrums that people throw. And we don't really give any sympathy to her. We don't give sympathy to Jane Eyre. By we, I mean, of course, the people in the story. They don't give any sympathy. They just ignore her. And she just seems like a child to them. And they don't realize that she hasn't had a normal growing up experience. She's been through so many things. You can at least try to help her. But they don't realize that. They're just like, you know what? You're an orphan. You're born ready. Let's go. You got to accept this. But you don't tell her why. Just you gotta accept it. And no more questions. That's it. You're my slave. I'm your master. That's all it is. And she makes those parallels. And, well, that's that. The pictures that she sees in the books. She chooses to have these books with pictures because her imagination is wild. And she can't let her imagination run wild. So what she does is she finds consolation within these pictures. These pictures complete her. She needs the pictures because they appeal to her senses. A huge thing that authors love doing is appealing to the writers, the readers, whatever, the character's senses. Because the character in the story, remember, when you appeal to their senses, that means that everything is intrigued by this. Senses are the basics of a human being. And there's one of the first things that we distinguish human beings, our five senses. Some other people don't have, some other animals, some other creatures, some other figures do not have the five senses that we have. And so that distinguishes us. So when we, in our natural form with our five senses, have these changes present to us, well, it completely changes our lives. What you see changes your lives. What you hear changes your life. What you smell, what you touch, what you taste. It all is revolutionary. Because this is not really your thoughts. This is exactly what's in front of you. Remember, you are changed much more by the experiences than just your thoughts. Experiences. Experiences are quite a journey. When you take your experience to a waterfall, let's say you're going to a waterfall, why not? And you jump in. You think of the water trickling for you. You think of how your feet are nearing the surface. And then you think about the submerge. You think about how the water's above you. It's all these thoughts. And what you could say about that is you could say, I was first scared and then I wasn't. I was first scared, then I wasn't. Your thoughts are formed by your experience. These pictures are basically her new world. Or, not her new world, perhaps, but the fictional world that's actually real. The metaphorical world that she can understand. And that's why she needs it. She needs to see her own life like a mirror. Because when she does, she knows how to respond. And she will respond with revolution. John Reed is... I had already said this. He's crazy. He finds Jane Eyre. Well, he doesn't find her, but he sees Eliza. Of course, the sisters basically just obey John Reed. They'll say whatever. They just were like, I don't care. I'm indifferent. They really don't give a damn. And so they're just going to say to John Reed, well, this is where Jane Eyre is. And they probably know about what he does to Jane Eyre, but they don't care. They don't care. They're just helping their brother out, aren't they? Just helping their brother. And how is it hard? It's hard not to help out your siblings. The siblings are the people that you connect with the most. So it does make sense. But we just don't step into the shoes of others. And that's a huge thing that you should start doing. And so they tell her where Jane Eyre is. And Master Reed, that's what he's called, Master Reed, John Reed, because, he's going to be the person who owns the house later. He comes out and he's very angry, Jane Eyre. He's 14 years old. And here's the satire that comes in. He's supposed to be all proper and wonderful and such stuff, but really, he's a fat bloke. I can't say it in any more words. He's a fat bloke. And he really isn't the perfect Victorian gentleman. Like, this is just the satire, I think, that Charlotte Bronte is playing in. And the funniest part is, it says, his mama had taken him home for a month or two on account of his delicate health. And yet his health is considered really good because he eats so much, but he eats too much. Delicate health means that you're doing very badly in health issues. He's doing amazing. Yet he's all delicate. He's treated with so much caution with his mother. And yet, no one cares about Jane Eyre. She can suffer all she wants. But the son, well, he must have everything perfect. I'm just saying that this is the idea of no equality in Victorian society. Materialism 101. Now, why does John Reed go on to abuse Jane Eyre? Well, he abuses Jane Eyre particularly because she doesn't do what a considerably normal person would do. And he would probably come up with any excuse. This is just a way to get his anger out on someone, and of course she's the scapegoat. And he is angry because she's hiding behind the curtains. She's not in sight. She's supposed to be in sight. Which, of course, he probably doesn't care about. Yet, no. There's gotta be a reason why. And also, she doesn't answer his mama a while since. She doesn't actually answer his mother. And there probably is a reason why he doesn't answer her mother. Because, well, she probably doesn't answer the mother because she's scared of talking to her, right? The mother is pretty scary to her because the mother regards her quite horribly. And I don't think we can blame her for any of these reasons, but John Reed does. And then he says, oh, the look you had in your eyes. Well, that's horrible. And it's just a look. And the look she had is that she was looking at him, and she thought of him as a very ugly and horrible human being. And he is. And he just doesn't realize that. He doesn't care about what other people think of him. If they think against him, that's bad. Strike. 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 I don't care what you think. You're against. Strike. That's John Reed. He's striking. And what happens, he literally throws the book that she's reading. Such a precious book. Just because she took it from his library. She took it from his bookcase. Does he ever read? Probably not. He doesn't seem like a great reader, honestly. But no, it's from his bookcase, and everything in the house belongs to him. He's a greedy pig. That's what he is. A greedy pig. And here, he just shows he needs to be greedy, and if someone goes against his greediness, and takes something from him, well, guess what? He's gonna want revenge. He strikes her with a book. That's right. He throws a book at her head. Bam! It hits her. She falls. Huge cut. Can you believe that? Blood's oozing out. He hit her with a complete book. I mean, that is just so cruel. Such a mean thing to do. To hit someone with a book. This is really just saying how people think that vengeance is the right way, but it's not. Vengeance is not the right way to get back at someone. Especially when they haven't done anything wrong. Especially when they've just made one minute mistake. We have to let everyone make mistakes. Or perhaps they're not mistakes. Perhaps you're considering the mistakes, but they're not. They're just excuses. And stop making excuses. Start with newness. Start with ending punishments. Talk to the person. Don't use violence. Because if you use violence, you don't fight fire with fire, do you? John Reed doesn't understand how to handle such an emotionally troubled girl. He's an abuser. He shouldn't be doing that. And Charlotte Bronte is just saying, hey, what you're doing is wrong. Victorians should stop with these horrible punishments. Because, well, you're not considering the person at hand. And so she ends with saying that he seems like an emperor of Rome. This is a really important part. He seems like an emperor of Rome, and she says that, because of his tyrannies. You see that he's not just the master. He's a master. He's a tyrant. He's the dictator of the household. It just goes to show how much power struggle there is. How they can ascend to such huge positions. Even if they're just normal human beings. Or not normal human beings, but like not the complete extremes. They can seem like the extremes because of these power struggles. What ends up happening, she fights in self-defense because he hits her. And just because that, she gets sentenced away, he doesn't. Why? Why, you ask? Well, just because Jane Eyre is not related to Mrs. Reed. She's a stranger. If a stranger hits her son, that's horrible. If her son hits a stranger, so that's fine. You see, they ignore what Mr. Reed does because they think it's normal. They think it's fine, right? Like, they don't even see it because, well, the son can't do anything wrong. And this is just a thing to say, stop pretending. Stop pretending that that your son, that your descendant, is a good person. No matter what they do. You shouldn't pretend that way. You should realize everyone for what they do, for their actions. And not ever treat someone better than another person just because you know them. Don't do that. Because, well, you can cause a tragedy for that other person. And Jane Eyre definitely suffered a tragedy. In the next chapter, she considers unjust. She's locked in a red room. This is where the isolation kicks in. And where, my friends, misery is eminent. Bye.